Hey, this is Mr. Cupcake, and welcome to the Just Dice cast. With me here today, we have JDL members Papa Bear.
Hey, hello.
And the Professor.
Howdy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about historical miniature gaming in general and just kind of historical gaming. But we're going to kick it all off by talking about a game that's kind of, I think, on the tip of our painting tables, on the tip of our mind, and I think the rule books are all readily at hand, and that is Blood Plunder. And they are coming into the final week of their Kickstarter, their second Kickstarter, which is No Peace Beyond the Line. And their first Kickstarter they did about a year ago, I guess, at this point, and it was quite successful. The game's really made quite a splash, pun intended, in the market. And I actually backed the original card Kickstarter just for the ships, much to my own chagrin, and I learned later that that was a huge mistake. But Papa Bear, you backed the first Kickstarter, and just for the folks at home, Blood and Plunder is a 28mm miniature game set in the golden age of piracy and the 17th century. With some of those very famous pirates from that period, and or they would call themselves privateers. But let's start off by what drew you to the game and what made you because you went pretty much all in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I backed the Kickstarter pretty heavily the first time, and I've been a historical gamer since the mid '70s, so I've got a lot of interest in the period. And actually, by way of hobby, I also do historical reenacting to include going to pirate festivals, which can be historical. And this is Blood and Plunder is actually doing it right. It's a historically based 17th century. They've done their research and they're really presenting some excellent castings and the ships, and it's just the whole idea. Plus, being in Florida, of course, we had a lot to do with piracy down here, and it just kind of captured my imagination.
Yeah, I love the fact that they're right from Miami, so they're really local for us. We've gotten the opportunity to see them at some conventions, and I know, Jeff, this is your first Kickstarter with them that you've backed, and what kind of drew you to the period and the time, like the game in general?
Well, first of all, being a historian and focusing on nautical stuff, the ships themselves, I don't know all that much about pirates and that time period, but the quality of their models drew me at first. And I've not seen before any ships that have been by any manufacturer that are quite as accurate and visually attractive as their model ships. And they actually have some of the features that ships of that period would have had, like the tumble home on the sides. Ships back then used to kind of curve inward as they went up, as you went higher in decks, and these ships have it. So they were eye-catching. That was the initial thing. And then I saw some of Leon's Papa Bear's castings that were painted up, and that was the final straw, as it were.
So you mentioned the tumble home, because I remember I know nothing about ships in general, so it's been kind of a learning process for me. And I remember you pointed it out on, I think, what's probably their most striking piece of this Kickstarter, which is, of course, the galleon. And you were when going back to the accuracy, I think what they've announced and what we got to see is that they're actually going to do the different, what do you call that back part of the stern where the decoration is?
The back part of the stern.
All right, well, that was easy.
Actually, at that point, I think it was called the Stern Castle. Again, I'm more of an Age of Steam guy, so sailing ships are a little bit foreign to me.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that the professor has a master's in history and is getting his working on his doctorate, and then, of course, and like Leon or Papa Bear mentioned that he started gaming historically in the 70s. You said, Papa Bear?
That's correct. Yeah, 74.
And then you got me involved in the 90s. So
That's correct.
So you're well earned your name, Papa Bear, in the group as far as like the amount of time you've been historical gaming. But I would think it's fair to say we got Leon, we're both fans of history. On top of being historical miniature gaming, and that was kind of the thing too. Is like I've always known that the pirate period, it's one of those periods of history that's grossly misrepresented. I mean, in a fun way. I'm not saying that the Pirates of the Caribbean stuff is fun, and it's kind of got piques a lot of people's interest. But what I've really enjoyed about the game, and it just kind of drew me into the period, is I love that in the rulebook even they kind of lay out the general flow of the history.
Absolutely, yeah. They do a great timeline in the beginning of the book, and it gives you some great scenario ideas while they're at it.
And then Jeff, the professor, correct me if I'm wrong, but Papa Bear's actually drawn you into doing the historical reenacting, right?
The reenacting or the...
Yeah, I thought you also are working on a Spanish soldado impression, aren't you?
Well, yeah. Well, when you say that, since there's like a history of 20 years worth of reenacting going on, I was a little bit confused. But yeah, with the Spanish garrison, yeah, I've got everything now but the waistcoat, and that is a long, drawn out, horrible story that I'll go into here.
Well, right. But just so everybody knows, we're talking about having the correct uniform and accoutrements to be a member of the St. Augustine garrison, which is 1740 Spanish, a little later than the period covered in Blood and Plunder, but from the rumors they're discussing, not a period they're not going to cover into the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue, because like we mentioned a minute ago, because they're relatively local, we go to the HMGS-South conventions, and so do they. And we had the opportunity to talk to them at Recon right before they kind of launched the Kickstarter. What were some of the takeaways, talking to Mike, what were some of the highlights that you got from him, Leon, or Papa Bear?
Well, just their plans for the future are amazing. They plan to release fortifications to go with this period, some of which are apparently going to be based on Florida fortification site. If I'm not mistaken, and I may not be 100% correct, but I believe he said that the fortification of Matanzas is one they're looking at, and some of the other Caribbean-based forts. And they're just going to continue expanding this line clearly into the 18th century that will have product support. So, I mean, they're just going to add to everything that they already have. And if you haven't looked at the line, it's already amazing.
Yeah, I think that's probably... There's a few things that I like about the game in general. And, of course, the models, we talked about that, is phenomenal. But going back to, like, the ships, let's talk about for a second. The ships themselves, like, the professor started mentioning, is the accuracy. But the key for me, and why I backed the original Kickstarter just for the ships, is you can play with them. And that's the thing that I love about it, is you can get the models onto the ship. You can move them around with ease. They've given you a rigging kit that's, yes, maybe is not like, if you're a ship modeler, I don't think maybe you'll like the kit a whole lot, but that's not what they're doing. They're doing a game. And there's plenty of people, going by the Facebook group. Yeah, sure, you can do some of the really high-speed stuff, like the rat lines and what's the thing called, the professor with the anchor?
Oh, the cat heads?
The cat heads. That seems to be one of the more popular mods that people are doing, because it doesn't get too much in the way. But no matter what, like, even their demo ships, you can play with them. You can put models on the ship and move them around.
Right. They're definitely designed to facilitate wargaming. And yet they make a great, great display model, too.
And then you and I played, actually, a demo game at Recon.
Yes, we did. I won.
You did win, and... as you are often reminding me. But what I found was getting into the game itself a little bit, is that it truly earns the term blood. Because...
Yes, it does.
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you and I kind of said, well, let's see what happens if we get really close. And we kind of got close, and I believe, you had all of your cannon and your swivel guns fairly well loaded.
I did.
And things...
And it deteriorated rapidly. Casualties mount extremely, extremely quickly. So if you've got ideas of being subtle in this game, yeah, good luck with that.
And then you played a second demo with Stinky Cheese the next day, and it was a little more. I felt like it was a little more. Subtle, I guess you could say. You guys kind of approached it a little more carefully, and
we weren't quite as aggressive.
Right. But it still came down to a boarding action, and what I found interesting is when you guys boarded, you had the distinct advantage. However, he was able to battle back some. I think you still won that game too, right?
I did, but it was only because we weren't using strike points in the game at that point.
Right. We were just kind of learning the game.
They were just letting us play it out, or it would have ended a lot sooner. And I probably would not have won. And it was just absolute ridiculously lucky dice rolls that allowed for that. Things that never happened to me.
Yeah. Oh, you say that, but every time I sit at the table with you, my dice rolls in comparison are ridiculously bad.
That's correct.
Now, I haven't played a land battle of it. You have.
Yes, I have.
And what'd you think of it?
Well, quite honestly, the land battles in some ways are easier to start out with, simply because you don't have to worry about what all the ships can do and the movements and the cannon, et cetera, which adds a different level of complexity to the game. I mean, it's nothing overwhelming by any means, but if you start out playing the land battles, that seems to be the most basic, and it really features some of the fighting styles of the troops. Like, for example, I had some of the Indios Milicianos, the Native Americans in Spanish service, to Christianized natives, and they can do some neat little things. They've got like stealth. They can pop out of the woods, shoot their arrows, and jump back in the same turn, and it just reflects some of what they, historically were able to do. So it was really a lot of fun.
And you mentioned those guys too, and that's one of the things I'm really excited about the new Kickstarter, is that they're bringing in a lot more of the natives, the Caribs.
They have an entire faction that they are releasing that is the Caribbean natives. You're absolutely correct.
Now, have you decided what you're going to do with your pledge, or which nationality are you going for?
Well, yeah, I've got Spanish now is what I'm finishing up my Spanish Kickstarter, and I also went ahead and got the English starter army, but I'm going to use I'm going to buy the European land forces to supplement one or both of those forces, because they could definitely be used for either force depending on how you paint them. And the dragoons that are coming out are just so beautiful. There was no way that I was not going to buy those.
Yeah, I was really hoping that they would do a live stream with, I think somebody asked, but Mike's kind of like, it reminds me of Jeff a little bit. His philosophy on the first live stream, I think it was, he was basically like, I would play test it, but they're not painted.
There you go.
So he was definitely adamant about that, but they may sneak one in before the end of the Kickstarter, because I know a lot of people are excited about that. I know there was some, and they did clear up some rumors that you cannot, in fact, debark a horse or a mounted soldier from a longboat in the water. That was you cannot launch them from the ship. So he definitely said that was not going to be included. So I know it's a disappointment for you.
I have to rethink my entire strategy now.
Well, what if the horse is being ridden by the blunder monkey?
Oh, the famous blunder. Yes, in that case, when you're using the blunder monkey alternative rule, you can in fact debark your horses at any point in the ship. In fact, they can do swimming boarding actions when at sea.
And the hate mail from Mike and the rest of the Blood Plunder crew will start shortly.
Exactly. I just suddenly got a bunch of angry responses to every post on the JDO Facebook page.
There you go.
But I think you mentioned something I thought was interesting, because it was one of those dynamics that doesn't come up a lot, Jeff, when we were talking the other day, and it kind of leads us into just maybe historical gaming in general. Is that you read a review that classified Blood and Plunder as a game, not a simulation. And I don't say that as a negative thing at all. I think it's a fair statement, and I would say that it's one of my favorite things about it, because what I found when we played the ship game, and I know he left a couple of the rules out just because it was a demo, he wasn't going to get into some of the minutia, but I didn't feel like we spent a tremendous amount of time calculating the perfect angle of the wind and where our sail was catching this, and spending a lot of time wrapped around the axle in the maneuver phase of the ship itself.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I didn't feel like it didn't matter. It wasn't just two ships sitting on a table we just shot back and forth. Does that make, you know what I'm saying? And I think that's a kind of a key thing about this game in an aspect, and I actually love about it, because one of the things I noticed in my reading and some of the research I've been doing is that there's not a lot known about this period.
Well, in terms of the fighting or the people, or with the ships,
in general, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of surviving, primary sources. That the primary sources aren't that in depth, and that a lot of our knowledge is starting to comes from either, I don't want to say rumors, not the right word, but word of mouth type thing. Finally, somebody wrote something down that wasn't a firsthand account, but also too, there's been so much more archaeology done because our ability to go underwater has improved in the last few decades or whatever.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And to be honest, historians they're a finicky lot. For some reason, that certain primary sources are sometimes at first met with a lot of skepticism. There's a book called The General History of the Pirates, spelled Pyrates or something like that. And it was supposedly written at the time, somebody thought by Daniel Defoe or somebody else, and that wasn't true. So then people who have been writing about it since then, they considered that source kind of a joke. Well, then somebody else comes along and begins looking at court records and trying to correlate them to events in the book, and comes up with the fact that, well, a lot of these things are accurate that are in the book. Maybe they're a little bit embellished, but that's kind of human nature if the story was a little bit boring. But as some of these sources are reviewed and looked at again, I think you'll find that there's going to be, well, not more primary sources, but at least a little bit more credibility given to the ones that exist.
Exactly, right. And it's funny because it's one of those things I think you quickly learn when you become, and I'm going to steal Dan Carlin's phrase, I always call myself a fan of history. I hesitate to call myself a historian. I'm not a historian by any stretch, but I've done a lot of reading on history, and I think one of the first things you get an appreciation for is how much we don't know. And especially like, when you go back to your ancient sources and stuff like that. But I was really surprised because I felt like, you figure mid-17th century, you're like, okay, by this point, we've got the printing press. We've got, books have become, literacy has gone dramatically up since the Middle Ages and so forth and so on. But there's almost this like black hole of information that is the Caribbean at this time period.
Yeah. Well, of course, and when you think about it, a lot of the people who could read would still be in Europe, and they'll be the upper classes. Everybody who's crewing the ships or building the houses, they're learning their trade by actually being there. The old apprentice type stuff. So they're not writing down how they did things. They're not writing down how they worked the ships or what their jobs were. They learned it by doing it. So yeah, there's not really going to be a lot of primary stuff. A black hole of knowledge is as those apprenticeships died out, the knowledge would be lost. In fact, it still happens today. Part of the reason somebody told me, or I've read, part of the reason that the Iowa class battleships are no longer being used, even though their heavy guns would be useful in shore bombardments, is because the technology no longer exists to replace the gun barrels. We can't do it anymore.
Huh.
Yeah, as the industry just went away. So they used up all the gun barrels that were in storage, and that's the end of that.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, and it kind of highlights something about going back to Blood and Plunder for a second, and this is, being somebody that's played a lot of rule systems, and I love rule systems. I love reading rules. I'll buy rule books. I've got rule books of games I've never even played. But a game like Blood and Plunder, you don't have the luxury of saying, we're not too sure about that and moving on, because you're trying to actually build mechanics or units or stuff around. You can't just leave a gap in the rules. And that's one of the things, again, I haven't read this period a lot, but I'm noticing that they've done a really good job of kind of filling in the blanks, I guess is the best way of saying that. And you can see that in some of the discussion, I guess, has come up. I know you see a lot in the discussion in the group, there's a lot of questions tossed out, like about the loot and about what, the different, for example, the Carib, going back to the Caribs, from what I understand, there was a lot of different little groups all over the Caribbean.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. And I would also, Mr. Cupcake, agree with what you said about the way that the rules build on each other, because they've allowed the mechanics to represent national characteristics, etc., without being bogged down in some of the absolute minutiae that we don't even know if it's right. Because as you said, what we do know is there's a lot that we don't know. And sometimes you simply have to extrapolate your final answer from the available data and to come up with your best possible answer. And that's what they've done with these rules. And that makes for, as you said, first and foremost, a good game without being a true simulation, but it still captures the flavor of the period. And a lot, one man's pirate, another man's privateer. So.
Oh yeah, that was one of the big. Yeah.
Said that back, but.
Well, as you're often you point out the you pointed out on our Facebook page about the Guarda Costa. You're saying like that's a perfect example of a group of people, depending on which side of the line you're standing on.
I believe they were really misunderstood by the English. Those people were just doing their jobs.
rather effectively and aggressively, we'll say.
That's correct.
Yeah, but I agree with you. And that's the thing too is just talking historical gaming in general. When we did the Lions and Leopards campaign game, like series of games of the Middle Ages, it was really interesting about the armor because I did a lot of research on the armor, and what you found was there's almost two schools of thought, and I think this overlaps a lot with gamers. And see if you guys agree with this. It's like they'll look at in 1400, the full plate mail was available, and they stopped using shields, and so they will not put a guy on the table with shields. And it's like, guys, they didn't just
utterly ridiculous.
Right, they didn't just throw the shield away, and you had that old Gronyard type guy who would have been like, I've been using shields since the first time I picked up a lance, that kind of thing. And you don't get it becomes very rigid, I guess to say. And that's, I mean, what do you like? What are some of the experiences you've had like gaming where maybe somebody has taken that attitude with you?
Oh gosh, where do you start? It's different games attract different types of gamers, but that's the kind of guys who'll argue over that shade of yellow is incorrect for German Dunkelgelb in World War II armored vehicles, as if there was only one shade ever produced. That shade of green on the uniform is incorrect, or they wouldn't have used that particular weapon in this particular year. Well, as you pointed out, and as any veteran knows, you use what you have to hand, and the longer you're in the field or the different producers that are involved, it's going to change little things. And these people who get wrapped around the axle over such minor details, they simply they don't understand really how the military works. As a former member of the 82nd Airborne Division, I can tell you now that when we would line up for formation, and we were arguably one of the most lavishly equipped infantry divisions in the United States military, and I would challenge you to find any two soldiers in that company that had the identical shade of uniform colors and or equipment. 1977, I showed up in the 9th Infantry Division as an infantryman. My entrenching tool cover was dated 1945.
Wow.
They didn't throw it away. So, yeah, it's just kind of ridiculous that people get that wrapped up in wargaming about it.
Yeah, and I was even listening to the Pirate History podcast this past week, and he talked about, I forget exactly what year it is, and I'm sure that anybody listening that's like super into the period is going to be like gnashing their teeth right now. But there was a point at which I guess it had, I know what it was when Morgan was doing one of his big raids, and I guess they went up again. They were severely outnumbered from what they understand, but the Spanish lost because that particular area was still equipped with the arquebus. And they were getting attacked by muskets, or the matchlocks, and it was like when you're outgunned at that level. But by that time period, the matchlock had was in the Caribbean, blah 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 blah. And if you stuck by that line, you'd miss the entire fact that that unit, like you said a minute ago, the professor is like, this wasn't like the place to be. This isn't where your high nobles went to hang out at this time period. This was the backwater. So it was like, whatever we have left over, we're going to send to the Caribbean and do what you can with what you got, kind of thing. And and you're right. It's one of those. I remember, and we co-hosted a game, and there's something for you guys and the listeners and stuff like that. We're going to tiptoe around certain stories, leave out names and places and dates to protect the innocent and the guilty. However, I can talk through the gaps a little bit and say that we co-hosted a game one time about a battle we were both familiar with, and somebody happened to sit at the table who felt he was an expert on that battle and proceeded to interrupt the game repeatedly, telling us all about the historical battle and stuff like that. And I found that from a GM perspective, that could be really hard. You know, when you're trying to run a game and you've got players, it's almost like they're so familiar with what you're running that it can make it difficult to game sometime, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I've had a very shared experience. And I learned things about that battle I don't know or didn't know when I set it up. And quite honestly, I don't think I learned anything that was accurate, but I was certainly told it was. So, and it's not that I'm not willing to learn by any means, but yeah, when you've got someone who constantly wants to interject, well, historically, this is what happened, you just said, well, maybe they didn't roll a 6, you know. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's where I really commend the Firelock team, you know, because they've done a good job of managing the game. I guess is the best way of saying it, managing the history, because like we keep talking about, all these things these challenges they're trying to overcome when you do a historical set of rules. Because, like, let's be honest, I mean, you got a game like 40K or Kings of War. I mean, they're great games. But you can do whatever you want. I mean, like, just retcon it. You know?
Yeah, no one can tell you you're wrong.
Yeah, and as like the professor pointed out, as more information is coming available, they're doing, you know, you got to kind of be aware of it and keep your thumb to the pulse. But that's one thing I really like about the team over there, is talking to all of them, because that was kind of cool. You were in line with us for the flea market. We had several of the members of the team, and forgive me, I don't remember all their names offhand right now, and I'm not going to attempt to insult anybody, because I'll be like, this guy doesn't work here. We don't have a Pete who works here. What is this guy talking about?
Yeah.
But just chit-chatting with them, you can tell that they really care about the history, and that's part of the reason why I think I've gotten excited about this game, and I decided to back this Kickstarter kind of heavily, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And Professor, you went in on this one too, but I think you're going for the ships for the Kickstarter. Correct me if I'm wrong, or what's your plan with the No Peace Beyond the Line?
Well, I very much want the galleon. It's a very well done model. It's the aesthetics of it is very good. It's pretty accurate to what galleons at the time looked like. But I did get a little bit of the land forces. They have the commanders, the special commanders. What?
Legendary commanders.
Legendary
commanders. That's the term I was looking for. I did get a couple of those. The Dutch commander and Captain Kidd. I mean, how can you not have Captain Kidd in a pirate game?
It's offensive if you don't. I mean, really, you should just walk away.
No, you should be flogged. I mean,
or keel hauled. But not walk the plank. That didn't happen, kids.
No, not at all. Never, not once, ever. But anyway, two of the extraordinary legendary commanders, and the European land forces. They have the artillery, and they're doing something smart in that with the land artillery, they give you the two different barrels, the light artillery and the medium artillery. But you know, it's easy to lose a barrel. You take it to a convention game, and then you're done. So I ordered a couple, or will get a couple of the extra cannon. They're doing the cannon separately.
Well, of course you will.
Yeah, well, hey, you know, I like the artillery. What can I say? And you know, that way I'll have 2 permanent heavy artillery, 2 permanent medium artillery. I can't imagine ever using more than 2 guns anyway in this particular game. And you know, that's my plan as of right now. Of course, as we're recording this, I think we still have 7 more days to the Kickstarter.
7 more days. I was on there tonight.
Okay, so that may change in the pledge manager, depending upon how long they give you to be able to change it. I really want the Dutch, but there's budgets to be, you know, horribly wrecked. And so I have to watch that.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I had to watch it. Well, I say I had to watch it, but see what.
Unintended?
Well, yeah, hell yeah, exactly. I think what I'm gonna do is, because I'll have you covered with the Dutch a little bit. I think I'm gonna do, because I did the dueling captains, so I think I'm gonna go with the unaligned and then the Dutch, and then maybe when we're at Huracan, pick up a nationality starter to kind of give you something to paint, and go for, because we talked about this, is the game's geared towards pirates and or privateer, you know, that thin line between private and privateer, and you and I both want to do that. We both want to have a good pirate unaligned force, where Papa Bear, you've kind of seemed to lean towards the nationalities a little more.
Yeah, I'm actually I like the Spanish organizational system, and because I've done reenacting out of St. Augustine with the units that portray Spanish, I've got a little bit of background there, and really learned about them, and you admire the way they organized and what they did here in the Caribbean. And then the English, of course, those are traditional enemies. How do you not, do the English if you're going to have the Spanish? And realistically, even though I know what you said about the unaligned and all that, these figures are designed so that with very little exception, any of them could be used within any force. The national characteristics of clothing, at least in the Caribbean at that point, were minimal. Your paint style will probably do more to differentiate it than the actual castings themselves. I mean, with obvious exceptions, Lanceros and etc. Those are clearly Spanish troops.
Yeah, and that's a good, you bring up a really good point, and I'm meant to come back around to it. You're right, the models are extremely flexible, and I noticed that's the only, if you're going to really nitpick, I noticed that's the only, I don't want to say the word negative, because it's not really a negative, because we just talked about how it's a positive, but I think some people have said, like, it's very difficult sometimes if you're not familiar with them, when you're gaming, remembering who's who. But there's been some really creative ways of getting around that. Like, people have been putting a colored line on the base, and then, like you just said, I've noticed recently several people have posted work in progress where they kind of toned the clothing a certain way. Maybe had like one color like covering all the models, just so that when you're gaming, you can differentiate the different units, because they do have their different flavors.
And that could be, I can see where that could develop a problem, as you said, if you're not familiar with your own troops, especially if you start crowding units together on the deck of the ship, because like the new Piragua that's coming out, the very small boat there, it's a or ship, dock, if you want to correct me. The Piragua is very small, but it can fit 25 castings on that small vessel.
Yep.
For the love of God, if you start the whole ship boat conversation in this podcast, I am shutting this thing down so fast, because or I'll let the professor talk, and I'll just speed it up later. And
we're fine. We're okay.
Oh man, but yeah, I'm excited about this Kickstarter. I know that they're gonna probably get the last minute bump. How many Kickstarters have you backed other than the original?
Well, this is only the second one they put out.
Oh, but I mean, you have never run any. You've never backed any other Kickstarters, but
I never backed a Kickstarter before Blood and Plunder.
Really? Okay.
And it excited me that much.
Wow.
And they did not disappoint. Their customer service has been superb.
Yeah, and I can't be too hard on myself, because I was backing the NBA Kickstarter, the Castle 2 Kickstarter at the time, roughly about the time. So, but I still, it's like one of the biggest regrets. I'm like, man alive, because there was what I like about what they've done is it seems like some Kickstarters, in my opinion, get a little too, you want to do exclusives, but they get a little too exclusive with certain things. So it's like, if you didn't back the Kickstarter, you're missing chunks of the game. But they did more of the alt pose approach. And then this time, they're just doing the free model approach. And I guess we've unlocked a couple, not a tremendous, like, we're not going to have gobs and gobs of free models, but we're going to have a nice handful of models now. They're and they'll probably clear 150, I think, easily before the end. They should get the...
Yeah, they're getting close.
So I guess we're getting, casualties, free dice.
Casualties is unlocked. The canoe is unlocked. The female pirate disguised is unlocked.
The governor.
The governor, yes. I think the guide is unlocked. And maybe the spy is not. I think. I may have it wrong.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I just got finished saying that they're not doing any, you can't get them everfigs. Yes, the disguised pirate is limited edition for the Kickstarter. However, I believe it was on the live stream. It may have just been at Recon. I've kind of got it all muddled together, but they've kind of committed that they may do some female units, because I guess there was a French all-female unit that they've kind of researched or something like that. I thought I remember hearing that somewhere. All right.
I haven't heard anything about that.
All right. Well, I guarantee you that that's true, and that you should definitely email Firelock about that immediately. For everyone. No, it might be something I dreamed about or something, but I could have sworn they said something on the live stream. But I know they did talk about, and I was really surprised when we talked about Recon, like you said earlier, they clearly have plans to go all the way through 18th century. Like that's a no-brainer.
Right.
But what I was surprised, and when I told the professor this, I think you went back and watched the live stream, so he can kind of back me on this one, is like, I was surprised that they're even saying, if this goes well enough, we'll take it all the way up to the American Civil War, and we stay and say, because that's when, it's like the fall of Rome. When did privateering stop in the West? It's okay. Well, yes, but Constantinople didn't fall until,
in the Age of Sail.
Yeah, in the Age of Sail. So the last commissioned privateer, from what I understand, was during the Civil War. American Civil War. I got to specify that in case we have any foreign listeners out there, because I don't want to downplay any other historical period from all those wonderful countries out there in our listening land.
You could just call it, the war between the states, and then there's no other one of those. So
yeah, let's open that nut. There's nowhere negative that could go. Let's go ahead and open that debate right now.
Only among the sanctimonious historians, but those people.
Well, don't be so hard on yourself. But we were talking the other day, and you were saying that, I guess, who was it? I'm sorry, me and names, but there was one of the Confederate leaders escaped in a sailed ship.
Yeah, the last Secretary of War, General John Breckinridge, who had been Vice President of the United States immediately before the war. He and a small guard of Kentucky cavalry escorted President Davis down into Georgia. They eventually separated, trying to be a diversionary force to lead the federal troops off. And eventually he and his son and an aide began traveling by themselves. So Breckinridge was afraid that he might face some kind of retribution, having been a vice president of the United States. So eventually they get into Florida. The son was terribly allergic to bug bites, so the father said, well, go ahead and surrender, and they sent him home. And the first leg of their journey, they find a boat on a river, and they sail down the river as far as it'll go. They decide that they want to get on the Atlantic side of the state, so they carry the boat 25 or 28 miles to the next river, sail down to the coast. Once they get there, they're trying to sail out to Barbados or Bermuda, one of the islands that are off the coast, a few hundred miles off the coast, but the boat's too small. So they sail down the coast and eventually find a larger boat, which I get the impression was about the size of a piragua. And they managed to steal it, which is interesting. After they get hold of the bigger ship, they give the people they took it from their weapons back, and they give them $20 in gold to pay for the ship, the new boat. And then they sail on down the coast. They run into federal search parties, but they convince them that they're Floridians that are just scavenging for, survival. They run into pirates, but they eventually get down to Cuba, and from then Breckinridge goes on to Europe and then eventually Canada. But the thought is that would make a really interesting scenario for this game. The scale of this game would really work well with that.
Yeah, and it seems like they said they're going to go all the way to that point, and it'd be great. And that actually brings up a good point about historical gaming, and that is scenario selection. And what I find interesting about the potential in that kind of, or something in that with those adventures, I guess you could say, or that period of history, is that that's not something people are very familiar with. And like we talked about earlier, I think one of the hardest things to do is to do a scenario people are familiar with.
Yeah.
And what I've found is that if you have so you guys could probably disagree with this, but I feel like the historical scenarios where in real life they were very lopsided or not very, whatever, like clear cut winner or whatever you want to say, are very difficult to GM or very difficult to run unless you have some kind of relative victory. Hold this long, delay, just destroy this much of the enemy before you're overrun, those kind of things. But ideally, you pick a scenario that is really well balanced. And we're talking about the American Civil War, so I feel obligated to mention Papa Bear. You have one of the best, out of the box. You've run it several times. I've played in it several times. One of the best American Civil War historical games using, I believe, Johnny Reb 2. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Battle of Olustee, aka Ocean Pond.
Yeah, that was one of the most numerically balanced battles fought during the Civil War, and yet it was an extremely lopsided victory in favor of the Confederacy in the terms of casualty percentages.
Which, when we gamed it, I think roughly it's been 50-50, because I think I've helped you play test it, and then I've played it at conventions, and I want to say that it's roughly 50-50.
You would be correct. You'd be correct based on the number of times, and I've run it probably half a dozen times at least at various shows and play testing, and it's winnable by either side.
Yeah,
it certainly is.
Absolutely.
A lot of it depends. It all comes down to dice in the end, but it's your deployment, your tactics. They're reflected in that game, and it's a very winnable game for either side.
Yeah, and that's what I think. That's the type of game that appeals to me. I guess you could say. I will say the funny little side story is when you ran it the one time at the convention. I can already see by your face, where I'm going with this. And we had, I believe, I was on the Confederate side, and you separated. It was like 3 people on each side. Basically it was 3 commanders. I was commanding the cavalry, the Confederate cavalry on the right, and our commander in the middle decided to do a Brigade Column, if I remember correctly.
Brigade Column.
And how did that turn out for him?
Well, considering that they ran into the Federal regiment armed with repeating rifles, I believe the professor's trying to cut in.
Well, just for the benefit of the audience, you might want to explain what a brigade column is. Some people may not be familiar with that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So a brigade column is in the American Civil War. You had, of course, your linear units with regiments. And how many regiments made up a brigade? Typically, was in
this game anywhere between normally 3 to 5 regiments,
which would represent.
And this was historical, so this would have been about 5 regiments.
Okay, so 5 regiments, and each one is roughly.
Well, depending on the size, but that's a 20-to-1 scale. So the regiments would have been averaging around 500 men per regiment in the brigade that he formed.
So several thousand men.
Looking at least a couple of thousand men in the regiment, or in the brigade, I'm sorry.
And what this player decided to do was to place them shoulder to shoulder, front to back, basically in the tightest formation you could possibly assume. And the intent behind this is actually, I believe, and Jeff, the professor, you should correct me if I'm wrong, but it was from an old Napoleonic tactic, where you would attempt to, en masse, push through the enemy position.
Yes, but now in Napoleonic times, they would do that as a follow-up to a massive artillery barrage that had, at least in theory, and this is a technical term, whacked most of the enemy. So, but by the time the war between the states comes along, technology has changed. Artillery is different. The rifle is definitely much different than the flintlock musket. So, a march or a attack column is not going to have the same effect that it might have had 50 years before.
I believe fish in the barrel is probably a close analogy.
Yeah, very, very tight barrel. As it ended up that one turn completely, the brigade was decimated, routed, and any Confederate hopes of victory were left on the edge of Ocean Pond. So, yeah, it was pretty much over.
I think one of my favorite things about that situation is you have to be one of the most fair GMs I've ever gamed with. Like, you are you're objective. You don't take sides. You don't have like a favorite faction. This is the game, and you totally broke from that, and like flat out said, you should not do this. you need to.
I said, this is really not a good idea.
And he said, I got a plan, and he did it. And because you weren't there, the professor, so we skipped the whole artillery barrage part, apparently, because it was a convention game and we were on a time crunch. So that may have been part of the issue.
It. Yeah, that was it.
Well, sometimes that happens.
So we talked about like a little bit, like I said, again, Alesti's a great battle because it's very balanced, naturally balanced. What are some of the other things you guys like to look for in a historical scenario? Like, what are some of the, when you're looking at a battle in history? I know, obviously, Professor, you were just talking about that kind of escape down through Florida thing, as being like, I think that's one thing I like to look at is what is unknown, like that little piece of history that is forgotten or is overshadowed by something else. But what are some of the other things you guys look for in a historical scenario?
Well, one of the things I look for, and this really is, it depends on who's running the game in no small part, and the rules that it's being run with, because is the game going to be fun? And I know that's really stepping aside from what you asked about the scenario, but is the game something that is played that's going to be enjoyable, or are you going to be trying to wrap your head around 20 different sets of charts the whole time and be totally lost? If you are, then no matter how good the scenario may be, it's not going to really be enjoyable. And that's a problem. But if we go strictly off scenario, I like to find something that is as balanced as possible, or that you can sell to your players, listen, you get a win by keeping him from winning, or keeping them from winning. And you may tell them up front, there's no way you're going to drive them from the field, but if you can, as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Cupcake, if you can keep them from being, at point B, getting there from A, then you get a decisive win. Give them something they can hold on to, something that's not as arguable or an intangible or a debatable finish. Give them a solid finish point, either being a tactical objective or something of that nature, and that so people know when it was accomplished. Or did you take a break point for that army and make them run away based on the rule system? Something of that nature.
And I found that sometimes those games can be the most fun. Like the win by losing well, I guess you could say. Those can be a lot of fun. What are some of the other like historical battles that you've gamed, or that you don't have to host, so maybe you played at a convention that like really stood out to you? Like, gotta dig deep now. I'm asking the tough questions.
Make me dig real deep now.
I would hum a certain tune right now, but we can't afford it.
Well, I can give you a little bit of cover time and answer the original question. One of the as far as scenarios, sometimes that can be really tough depending upon the time period and the of what you're playing. For instance, War Between the States naval is very hard to find a balanced scenario. Without trying to slight the Confederate Navy, the quality of their ships, the material, just wasn't for the most part up to what the Federal Navy had. So it's going to be most things are going to be very, very lopsided. So there's only a few engagements where you can find something that has a fairly good chance of either side winning. So with that, you have to come up with scenarios. And for instance, there was one I had read about where in 1864-65, Admiral Raphael Sims, who was commanding what was left of the James River Squadron of ironclads in Virginia, he came up with a plan that he was going to take the ironclads out in a last stand type of scenario and assault the Union supply base at a place called City Point. Now, he never actually did it because it would have been suicidal. He would have lost his ships, but more importantly, he would have lost the crew. And there was just no point in it as far as he could see. But that made for an interesting war game scenario. There's no lead widows, so since there's no lives being lost, you can go in and see all the ships get sunk, and it worked. The scenario itself that I eventually did it at a couple of conventions in San Diego, was the Confederate ships were supposed to come out, attack the supply docks. There were 4 supply docks modeled, and one of them was an ammunition dump. They won if they managed to destroy one or more of the docks. I think it had a total of 7 turns. So as long as they destroyed one dock within 7 turns, the Confederates had achieved a victory. Now, it didn't matter if they lost any ships, but still they met some kind of victory objective. Now, if they hit the dock that was the ammo dump, it destroyed the 2 docks beside it. So they could destroy up to 3 docks and score a fairly major victory. And the way it was, the way we detailed it is, if you did that, or if the players did that, they were effectively giving the Confederate Army at Petersburg 2 or 3 months of extra life. So they had there was a story to it and a little bit of cinema to it. But still, it was something that in real life didn't happen. And that's, in some periods, that's what you have to use. You have to use a little bit of imagination.
The what-if scenario.
Yeah, and I know that isn't terribly popular with some folks, because that's one of those things where you don't know who won, so it's going to be a debate. If somebody, the losing side, they don't like how it turned out, so they're going to say forever, if only we had done this, it would have been different. Well, this is one of those scenarios where you have to do that. The next, and aside from the scenarios, it's something that Papa Bear mentioned, is it's nice when there's not a super thick rule book. It's and that's one of the problems with naval gaming. I know that's why our group has never really got into it, because you have to learn charts.
We don't know the difference of a boat and a ship to begin with.
Here we go again.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And the new classification of vessels. But anyway, well, we're going to get into that one soon. But anyway, you have 15 different charts. You've got to know wind direction and this type of artillery shell and everything else. But what's nice is when you can find a system that allows you to use, that gives you a flavor for the time period, and maybe it lets you use the tactics of the time period. And one of the things that some games are getting into now that really at least turns me off is all these special rules or cards or add-ons that make it an exercise in how can you make this list that countermands that list. It's more like chemistry than game.
It becomes an arms race.
Yeah.
Well, and it's list building, because I know what Jeff's referencing exactly. I'm sorry, Professor. I know what he's referencing entirely. And once you start take a historical game and add too many special abilities that are just unrealistic. And I'm not saying you can't enhance or shouldn't be able to enhance certain characters, and but there's you've got to have a limit there, or it's even you're playing 40K with historical figures, which I love 40K, so that's not a problem. But I'm just saying you're changing what you're playing there.
It's exactly, it becomes difficult because, and that's kind of the double-edged sword of the tightrope you're always walking. That's what I'm going to say, tightrope, because it's with historical gaming is because I think the temptation is to go the simulation route, to make it almost too realistic. And when you implement that much in fact, we made a joke about it, because one of the problems I have building up to Lions and Leopards is how to design a scenario around a siege. And I made a joke, and I said beforehand, anybody who's going to participate, meet 3 weeks beforehand in the parking lot. We're going to starve ourselves to death and get dysentery. Because
gotcha.
Because that was what a siege was. And they typically, and you read, especially in the late 100 Years' War, where the period we were shooting for, or mid to late, I guess it's 100 years, so roughly around the time of the Black Prince, when he went to Spain. And which was 13. It doesn't matter. Point is, attacking a castle was boring, and it generally broke on less than exciting things. So we had to design a scenario that was, okay, we're going to go over the walls, and the way we kind of got around it is I cheated. I basically, what it boils down to is I set the last game up as if the castle was already breached and already compromised, so that the players weren't because that was the other thing too, is we didn't want to end up charge at the wall, run a ladder to the wall, roll some dice, die. Charge, run a ladder up to the wall, roll some dice, die. Because the reality was that's pretty much how they went. So we already had the walls breached, and we actually had one of the best games I've ever run. And because of
it was a great game.
Because of the players, and it was fun and everything like that. And I had a point. I was going somewhere with that. Darn it. And I was almost there. But no, but it comes down to, like you say, I guess that's the challenge of historical gaming, is that you don't want to make it too realistic.
Yeah.
You know, and I say historical gaming because there's nothing wrong if you're the type of person that loves a good simulation. Knock yourself out. I just tend to lean away from that.
Well, and the thing is, games like that are better suited for small groups that are all well familiarized with the rules, where you can enjoy the competitive nature of those games and the small, the little nuances of that game, as opposed to trying to run something at a convention where you're introducing someone to a game system. You overwhelm people at a convention with a new rule system, and that's where you look around and suddenly realize your table is empty and people are shopping, or I have to go to the bathroom at home in the next state and they don't come back. And, you realize you've lost them at that point. And there's a lot of distractions at a show anyway. But I think if you get too rules heavy there, and as you said, try for the simulation versus the game, that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
And the simulations I've seen, and this goes back to San Diego, there's a naval game that covers World War I through the modern era. They're trilogy games. I forget what they're called. But those games were true simulations. They had charts. They knew every type of armor that every ship had ever had.
Is the Sea Creek?
No, it's not Sea Creek. It's Victory at Sea, or there's a couple different ones. There's Victory at Sea, War at Sea, and I can't remember which one it was. It's put out by, I want to say, Avalanche Games or something like that. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is that the rule system is so complex that every game we played, and we played it fairly frequently, it was one of our mainstay games, we had to have 2 refs at every game. One had the rule book or the binder open in front of him at all times, and the other was actually managing the table action.
Wow.
And it's worth noting that those 2 refs, one of them was a retired Navy lieutenant commander, and the other was a lawyer.
Wow.
And the lawyer was in the book. And we had another guy who was kind of he was one of those guys who you throw a math problem at him and he immediately knows the answer, has absolutely no social skills whatsoever, but just, it's kind of like Rain Man. I mean, he just knew answers when you threw stuff at him.
I mark him off as an advertiser.
Yeah, well, hey, they went out of business years ago, so it's okay.
All right, carry on.
So we'd open up the door to the main shop because we were in a cordoned off room to a gaming store. We'd open up the door and say, "Hey, Chuckles, this happened. What's the answer?" And he'd look up and give us the answer, and then we'd close the door and continue on. But yeah, and they were fun games. None of us ever had to learn the rules, but we had 2 experts.
Yeah.
Who, and on top of it, they were people who loved reading rules. You got to have people who do that, which those people are demented. But that's me.
Hey, I'm still on the call. One of the things I think the other way around it, and you brought up a good point, is I think because you've mentioned this before, maybe you didn't say it this time, but like we've talked before, is when you were in San Diego, you guys would play all day.
Yeah. Typically what would happen, it was always on Sunday. We'd meet at 8 o'clock at a restaurant. We'd have breakfast together. And then from there, we were there when the store opened at 9. And we would be there till 4, 5, however long it took. And fortunately, the guy, he would work with us if it was a really long game or a game that needed extra sessions. We would take pictures, or one time he even let us leave things there until the next week.
Yeah,
which worked out really well.
And then you kind of have to do that when you get into the more detailed games, because I remember one of the games I played in of yours, Papa Bear, was the World War II 20mm game that you have a tremendous amount of stuff. And I know there was a homegrown kind of set of rules but we took a lunch break.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you kept, and it wasn't, and you, that set of rules is kind of one of the best, most balanced rules I think I've ever played, but when we started off, I had no idea what was going on. But by the afternoon session, I had gotten some rhythm. That's extremely hard to do at a show.
Yeah, it is.
Because you rarely get the same people, for both sessions. Like, for those at home, the way HMGS-South runs their convention, that's typically the conventions we GM at, is unlike like a Gen Con where it's kind of free form. They do like an afternoon session, a morning session, afternoon, and then evening session. And so like Bill Moreno is a very popular GM. He'll do that. He'll run games all day long. And, I played in one of his games, but we were there for 2 sessions. And so by the time we got to the second session, actually I have a great story about that. I probably won't mention it here, but because by the time I got to the afternoon section, I kind of knew what I was doing. But we had a shift change, and he handled it beautifully. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Bill Moreno is an award-winning GM, and he puts on tables that are like, I mean, if you War Games Illustrated, if you read War Games Illustrated, any of these hobby magazines, you've probably seen one of his tables, or you've at least seen the quality, right? So yeah, Good Ground Miniatures, correct. He's the proprietor of that. Anyway, his tables are amazing, but he does that. And one thing I found is when I did that for Lions and Leopards, one of the big challenges hidden in there is not just keeping the players, getting them up to speed and getting them going and getting them rolling, is that if you get a little bit of, let's say, the metagamer in the first session, who it's getting late in his session, he's not going to play the afternoon session. He might do something crazy wonky and then set the people up in the afternoon for failure. You know what I'm saying? Like, because they come in and they go, whoa, why did you charge out to the open because you're out of time? So they're really hard to manage, those big sessions, unless, like I say, you have to have consistency of players,
Well, that's definitely one advantage to, what we call in San Diego bunker gaming is, if you have a bunker somewhere, that leave the table in C2 or, the game in progress and be able to get back to it. That's definitely a benefit. Of course, most people don't have that, and if you're gaming in a store or at a convention, you certainly can't do that. But, if you can, it's a golden opportunity.
Which we'll bring it full circle, because I know we're pushing an hour here, and I wanted to try to keep these podcasts right about an hour so we're not droning on too much, and plus leave some anticipation for next time. You just never know what we're going to talk about. That's the beautiful thing about Blood and Plunder. I felt that when we played it at the show, picked it up really quick. I knew what I was doing by turn 2. The activation mechanism, which is my favorite 2 things about the system, is the way they do activation with the cards, because it keeps everybody involved all the time. It's got a nice theme thing with the bluffing of the cards, because and for those of you at home, the way it works is you each have a deck of cards. You draw some cards, and you put a card down. Then your opponent says the same thing, and then you flip the cards. And then based on the suit, you go first, or one person will go first, and then it'll also determine how many actions they get based on the quality of the unit that they're activating. So you get the idea that, yes, you may put a high suit card down, and you may go first, or like a high value, high suit card, but you'll have less actions than, say, typically who goes second is going to maybe have more actions. So it's a nice risk versus reward balance of play. And I love that, and I felt like correct me if I'm wrong, Papa Bear, you play, it keeps you involved, right?
Oh, absolutely, the whole time.
And so the other thing, and I know you appreciate this, because you claim to have bad rolling, but you're not even anywhere near me. But is the fortune coins? I love the fortune to get those re-rolls, because
I agree.
A player like you'll have the moments where dice just go cold. And that, by pulling that fortune token, it gives you the chance to reroll, which is a good feeling. But also, what I've noticed is it kind of levels the luck out a little bit.
Yeah, it keeps you from losing the game because you made one bad dice roll.
Right.
When you may have done well up till then. So, yeah, I would totally agree with that. It's a great, elegant little random addition to the game. And
we're getting more doubloons this time too, which is fantastic with our Kickstarter. So,
well, of course.
Wherever there's some kind of secret shop, I don't know. Maybe they know where our sunken ship is offshore, and it was like coming from China at some point with plastic or metal coins.
Yeah, Tosha. Yeah. I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know, but But we're gonna get more of those. But going back, like that's what I love about the game is to me it strikes a good balance between have enough depth, enough that you can bite your teeth into, but you can maybe even like we did. They left out a couple rules, and we were playing at a show within minutes. We knew what we were doing right away. I mean, relatively speaking, because you and I, we've gamed together so much, we were just kind of like, hey, let's see what happens. Maybe a GM would have stepped in at some point and said, you may want to shoot a little bit before doing what you're about to do with those ships. But hey, we learned a lot.
Exactly. And it was just a lot of fun. And that's the way this whole system works. And even things that in the second game I played when I was playing Stinky Cheese, as you pointed out, and he's like, oh, the only way you're going to hit it is like a 9 or a 10. And I rolled like 3 9-10s. And I said, you mean like that? And being a total wise guy, because that just doesn't happen. But he was like, yeah, that'll do it. And of course, it changed. It shouldn't have happened, but it was just fun.
Well, what I like about it is it's got the pirate flair without being pirate cheesy.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that, again, there has never, to my knowledge, and I'm sure someone could correct me, but I've never seen a skirmish level pirate game that was historically based. I mean, it was like, for God's sakes, you'd think people were painting undead pirates or something.
Hey, easy now. Don't mess with my undead pirates. Yeah, for those of you, the listeners, we have this, I don't know what you'd call it, this beef going. I guess not beef, whatever, but I'm actually, confession time, I actually bought the original ships to use with my fantasy pirates. And I love my
Please pay close attention.
Yeah, so we're talking all this on a history podcast here now. We're getting into the truth here. Is what drew me to the game was my fantasy figs. Because I do have a big chunk of, I've got mainly Reaper, but I've got a beautiful sculpt by Bombshell Miniatures. I've picked up the Razor Coast, which I can't remember. Somebody else actually bought that license or has the molds or something. But they kind of like, I guess, went out of business and then somebody bought them. A couple of their models, which are absolutely stunning. So I have some really great undead stuff and some fantasy stuff, but over the course of the last year, I go over your house, we're going to do a game, you pull out something you're painting, and I'm just like, all right. And I love history so much that I can't help it.
And they're such beautiful figs to begin with. You can't not want to do them. And I tease Mr. Cupcake, but I have a lot of fantasy, sci-fi, etc. So I'm just busting his chops.
Oh, yeah.
It lends itself to whatever, but as a historical game, it is outstanding.
It really is, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of this Kickstarter. I wish them nothing but the best of luck coming into the last week. If for no other reason, we get free stuff if it really blows up. So, I mean, there's some selfish motivation in there, but at the same time, like we said before, talking to those guys, they're just a great group of guys. They care about the period. We give. Everybody on the Facebook page has been giving Mike a hard time about the Blunder Monkey, but it's almost like a testament to how committed he is to the history of how he kind of like, I'm not doing the kind of grumbles about it, whatever. But that's, I think, like I said, it's a testament to how much they care about the period and doing it right and
keeping it pure.
Yeah, keeping it pure, staying history, and like we said, they're going to take this as far as we let them take it. So I encourage everybody out there in podcasts, YouTube, listening land to go really consider backing this one. They've really made it accessible with the Kickstarter. If you don't back the Kickstarter, go to their website. The links and everything will be in the comments. Consider maybe picking up a starter set. I mean, you can get into this game. It's really, I mean, any miniature game's you're gonna pay, but in the spectrum of miniature games, I think they've kept the cost really reasonable. Especially those ships. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what deal with who they made to get those ships as cheap as they sell them, but the quality is outstanding. And correct me if I'm wrong, and you guys, I believe everything is produced here in Miami. So it's an American run company. I mean, it's a U.S. run company. That is my understanding, yes. And they're local Florida guys, and they do a great job with it. And we're really looking forward to seeing where they go with it. And I think that's about it for right now. I just want to thank my guests, the professor, and just the professor, soon to be Dr. the Professor, but we'll get there. And then also Papa Bear, fellow triumvir or biumvir. What are we now?
We're the bums.
Okay, we're bumvers of the Just Dice League. Be sure to check out our Facebook page. Just search for the Just Dice League. We've also got our website, justdiceleague.org. And our YouTube channel, just search for Just Dice League. But pretty much just type Just Dice League anywhere, somewhere in Google or whatever your favorite search browser is, and you'll find us. Give us some likes and subscribes. We really appreciate it. Be sure to check out Firelock Games, Good Ground Miniatures. Check out HMGS-South.com. They got a great convention coming up in September. Definitely worth checking out. We'll probably do an episode talking just about that here in the next couple months. And anything else from you guys?
No, I think that's good. Hope this will stimulate some interest in this game. It's got a great following already, but I'd love to see it grow.
Well, I appreciate you gentlemen's time. The Professor, you got final words?
No, just echoing what Papa Bear said about the game, and just one other quick thing. It's probably one of the most aesthetically pleasing games I've seen in a long time. The quality of the miniatures, even if you're not initially a pirate fan or a fan of that era, you look at those miniatures and it's a very, very cinematic game. Puts beautiful tables. So it's really worth at least looking at to see if you might be interested in.
Well, again, thank you guys. Really appreciate your time. And we went from a general history podcast to pretty much talking about Blood and Plunder the whole time. So which is fine by me. And until next time, fair wind, following sails, and game well. Game very well. Music courtesy of Ben Sound. You can visit him at bensound.com.